Having a podcast was always something that I knew we needed, but it wasn't clear to me how it was going to fit back in. And because we didn't necessarily approach it strategically, it never really had a home inside of Digital Marketer.
I think it was maybe the third or fourth event where you got up on stage and you said, hey, who here, raise your hand, has a podcast?
If we're selling it, what are we going to do with the proceeds? And if we're buying, is there anything else that we could buy that would generate a higher return than this?
Hello and welcome to the Perpetual Traffic Podcast. This is your host, Ralph Burns, and this is the show where we share cutting-edge strategies in acquiring leads and sales to acquire more customers so your business can achieve its vision. And speaking of vision, we have got a guy who, I think sets the vision. I don't want to pump this up too much because I think Kasim and I still are, we sort of have to pinch ourselves the fact that we're actually going to be talking today with the one and only Ryan Deiss, who, if you're a listener of this show, we reference Ryan, I would say every other episode. We used to listen to him we used to talk about him quite a bit when we would talk about our commercial breaks back when DigitalMarketer actually owned Perpetual Traffic, Kasim. So we can get into that here today. Ryan might have his own spin on that now that we've sort of exchanged hands. We're going to be talking about that a little bit. But today is all about Ryan Deiss in the future of what it is that we're all doing every single day. At the heart of this show is it's a digital marketing show, and there's no better place to get digital marketing education, expertise, and it all sort of comes from the guy that we have on the show here today, Ryan Deiss, obviously over at Digital Marketer and a lot of other companies. So welcome back to Perpetual Traffic, Ryan.
Gents, thanks for having me again. It is always a pleasure to be here, infrequent though it is.
I think when you guys,
that was a threat,
actually,
Ralph.
Yeah, I know.
That's letting us know this
dig.
better get good quick. Or...
I would always sort of say to myself, like, wow, Ryan owns the show. I think we've only had him on like twice. Shouldn't we have him on as a regular guest? But no, we went 400 shows. I think you were on twice.
Yeah,
so.
This will I will now have been on 50% as many times when I didn't own the show as when I did. So that's really exciting for me. So thank you for that.
Well, we can just change all that. It's just that easy. It's just a matter of getting it into your schedule here. So
there you go. Every week.
Yeah,
every week. It's just me.
You want to be like
for those every other week not watching. Ryan had a visceral head shake. It was
every other week. Not. Absolutely not. Yeah, you got to catch that over on YouTube. So, all right, before we get into the show, we're actually going to talk about our actual transaction, which I think a lot of people are curious about. We've obviously mentioned it. We now own the show. It was a digital marketer show for 6-7 years. Had a great relationship there. We, actually did do a transaction where everybody came out on the happy with it, which is oftentimes not the case in business. We'll get into that in just a second. So before we get into that, we always ask our guests, like, what nugget do you have off the top of your head that can help the listener of Perpetual Traffic in the here and now doing what they're doing, trying to scale their business?
Yeah, so we did something really cool lately on the Scalable side of the house. So Digital Marketer's sister company is the Scalable company. Digital Marketer focuses on digital marketing and growth. The Scalable company focuses more on kind of scale, operational efficiency, sort of the two sides of the entrepreneurial coin. And at Scalable, we actually have an event coming up in a few weeks. And so we're doing a lot of testing to promote that particular event, running a bunch of ads and things like that. And somebody gave us the idea of running these problem-centric ads. I was like, what are you talking about? And when he explained it to me, I was like, oh yeah, this is the most obvious thing in the world. We used to do variation of it, 7-8 years ago. It worked so well, we stopped doing it. It was one of those kinds of things. But the idea is really, really simple, but it's really powerful. What you do is you essentially come up with a list of 30 problem statements that your customer or client would have. Like, how would they say their problem? And this, if you got a sales team, you can specifically just ask your sales team, hey, what are some of the problems that you hear, right? What are the things that people would say in their own words? You can also look at doing searches for oftentimes these will come up in Amazon reviews for related products and things like that. But if you can come up with brainstorm, or you can also use ChatGPT, hey, ask as a researcher and come up with X number of problem statements. They're usually going to sound like I wish, I want, I need, so there's going to be some kind of a problem statement, brainstorm 30 of them. And then we created ad campaigns with an ad where the only thing on the ad, it was just an ugly ad, like a kind of goofy greenish background that was designed to just stick out and not look nice, right? That classic old school. Remember when every Facebook ad had like a hot pink border around it? Like that, like every Facebook ad had cleavage and or a hot pink border around it, like in the early days of Facebook ads. So this is kind of harkening back to the hot pink. Yeah, it worked like a charm. This is harkening back to the dark pink or the hot pink back border. Ugly color, and the only other thing is just the text of the problem statement in a quote. Right. So one of them for our business, because this again is for entrepreneurs, it's, if my business is growing, then why am I making less money? Right. Would be an example of a problem statement that we hear from entrepreneurs.
I really want to double click on that right now. Like you having said, it's just, there's this visceral reaction in me that goes, I need whatever content's on the other end of this gate.
Well, and that was one of the ones that won. So what we did is we ran an impression campaign. I don't remember how many impressions that we ran, but we weren't really interested in conversions or anything like that. But it was just the image. And then like the title and description in the ad was just like, scale your business. It was intentionally generic because the only thing we wanted to test for, we wanted to isolate for the problem statement, right? Isolate for the problem statement. And we just ran some impression campaigns across it and ran it for, I think, like 400 impressions, kind of just took the top 10 in terms of click-through rate and cost per click, kind of looking at those as a ratio. What were the top 10? Ran it again, got it down to the top 5, ran it again, and then used that to inform headline tests on landing pages, but everything else. And it was just one of the coolest, simplest things in the world. I think marketers overcomplicate this. We need to be speaking into the problems that we solve for. We need to stop talking about our freaking product, stop talking about even the category that we're in, how we're the best in this particular space. Speak to the specific problem. I mean, the sweet spot is problem-aware people anyway. So just speak out to the problem, read their minds, engage in the conversation they're having in their own brains. They're likely to click. And what do you know? It worked. And so we got some really cool, not just new ad sets out of that, because then we decided, okay, let's take this ad copy and create a bunch of different ad variations based on this that looked prettier, that was more quote unquote on brand. But let's keep the ugly ones in too and see which wins. But informing the ads, informing the landing pages, informing email copy, it's just a phenomenal way to get real data that I'm not seeing a lot of people do. And it was cheap. It was like hundreds, maybe a couple $1,000s to run that test over a period of about 10 to 14 days.
Makes so much sense. And the type of ad was the question or the statement, was it in the image or was it in the copy itself?
In the image.
In the image itself.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
In the image itself, there was almost nothing in the copy. Again, like the headline of the ad was like, scale your business. And the other one was, attend this event on how to scale your business. I mean, it was intentionally generic. We wanted to isolate just the problem statement itself in the ad. Boom, there you go.
Dude, that's a nugget within a nugget too, which is split testing the ad as a standalone element without worrying about the entire rest of the funnel.
Right.
We used to do that way back in the day, but I swear it's been 5 years.
Yeah, we used to do it all the time. 5 years since we ever
took that approach.
Yep, all the time. We do it. We got too smart for that. Now we test different ad sets and we don't isolate anything anymore. We're just too smart for that, I guess. So, yeah.
It worked so well, we stopped doing it.
Worked so well, we stopped doing it.
It worked so well, we stopped doing it. I think that's a common problem with a lot of marketers, actually. And everybody, no matter what level you're at, like, oh, I used to do that thing and now I don't do that anymore. Like one of the things that now it's like a new strategy is awareness, which is create like a blog post or a healthy, like a nice educational piece of content, which is a gateway into ultimately the solution that you're trying to sell on the back end. Just run that and then use all that data to figure out what your potential messaging could be for your conversion ads, or at the very least, just at the very top of the funnel, and then just retarget them with an actual call to action, a conversion ad. It's like, this is like a new strategy. I remember talking about this 7 years ago.
Yeah. That was the strategy when retargeting first came to Facebook. It was buy ads to content to build your pixeled audience to then make the ask. And I remember back in the day, the net cost per lead was lower if we basically had them click on what was the equivalent of 2 ads.
2 ads.
Because the initial ad cost was so inexpensive that because it was good content and it got shared and all that stuff, that when it was an ad going to good content, it actually got shared. Then it could be, what if we just put the content in the ad itself? Oh, we can actually put videos in these things now.
Right.
Then we all just got impatient and greedy.
Yeah.
And so I think so much of this is discovering what were the things that used to work before we all got impatient and greedy.
Yeah. Well, we got impatient, greedy, and spoiled. It started to work so well that it just money came. Like, why would I get in the way of money? And so we started running these ads that were converting like crazy. And then when that stopped working for all the various reasons that we, talk about, then now it's back to basics.
And I think so many direct response or performance marketers just wanted to go for that first touch sale or first touch opt-in, first touch, level of consideration, name, email address, without putting anything in front of it. And there was a time, let's not forget, between, let's say, 2014 and 2020, where ad costs, they were still relatively cheap and you could do that. But ad costs and CPMs, although I just saw a stat from Meta, from our partner manager, that actually shows that the CPMs for Meta has actually decreased in the last year.
I don't trust any of those numbers.
Let's double check that one.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't seem to make sense. But anything, whenever
just
you
got a transmission from the Death Star and they told us.
Yeah.
Somebody intercepted
you're fine.
That's
you're
right.
fine. And go have a picnic. It's going to be a bright sunny day.
Everything's great. Everything's great here. Just keep running those
usage is up. New users are up. New babies are being born. They're all on Facebook automatically.
Look at our stock price since the beginning of the year. You didn't realize, it actually cratered at the end of last year. But, everything can have its own individual spin. But the point is like that ocean for website conversions, I don't care what niche you're in, is an expensive, bloody red ocean right now. So you have to start thinking about different ways in which to approach the market. I think this is a brilliant way of doing it. And image with interview your sales team, interview your customer service team, find out what the real problems are, and just test this strategy. Super smart. I'm curious, and this is a long nugget, by the way, but it's a really good one, that when they did actually click, where did they go? Did they go to a call to action page, or was it more content? Because you weren't necessarily looking at that as your success metrics. You were looking at CPC, you were looking at CTR. But where did they go? I'm just curious on that. What that next click would be.
In this case, they went over to the event, an abbreviated event sales page to buy a ticket, and it was cool. We did actually sell some tickets. Right. I didn't necessarily think we would, and we did two-step it, where the first step was to ask for name and email address, because I didn't think that we'd have a lot of conversions, and I wanted our sales team to follow up with them to actually sell the tickets. So I think we sold during this whole test. I think we sold a handful of tickets, but those handful of tickets pretty much offset
paid for the cost of traffic.
Yeah, pretty much paid for the test. Yeah. It's not enough that I would have just kept running that as is, but the data was hugely valuable.
That's awesome.
Yeah, if you can test for free, that's a really big deal.
Yeah.
And I just puts you in kind of a friendlier position.
This can also be done in a couple $100 budget too. Like you guys went a couple $1,000s, which in the grand scheme of things is obviously small. But this can be done, and we tell this to customers of ours, like you can test this strategy for like 1% of your total ad budget just to see if we get any play out of it. I think it can be done at a very small scale, and you're going to see too, like those impressions that you get are going to be at a fraction of the CPM of the website conversion ones that you would run where you're actually asking for a name or an email or a registration or a small purchase, that kind of thing. So
yeah, you're right. And it's a good point. What I would have preferred to do is just what you said, which is test for less over a longer period of time. Mm-hmm. Because the event is coming up quickly, we needed speed. And so we were willing to pay more for speed. But you can lower your per day because it's hard, right? You run a test like that and you're kind of pulling all your data over 2 days. It's probably right. But the reality is some stuff could happen in those 2 days. Like who you get shown to could be different than the normal. So I'd rather spend less, have it spread out over a longer period of time. But yeah, again, in this case, the event is, the time was, I think, 6 weeks away, less time now. So we needed to get the data quickly.
What's the event? Tell us about, if the listener wants to go, is that open to the public?
Yeah. Get Scalable Live. It is getscalablelive.com. And so it is our event for bootstrapped entrepreneurs who want to learn how to scale their business. And so
if you're listening to this, I haven't gotten to this event, obviously, but I've gone through the Scalable content, and there's nothing more overwhelming than being, I think, Ryan, you term it as an accidental entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, most of us. And what you guys have done is really a miracle. It's like an instruction manual, but it's ad hoc that I can kind of take and customize for me. So, if you're listening and that sounds appealing, this is absolutely worth checking out because the content's phenomenal.
Yeah, thanks. And it is, it's kind of like the old school traffic and conversion summit days, like when it was basically just me and Perry up there, kind of teaching what we knew. Like that event couldn't stay like that. We needed to grow. We need to expand it. The community was growing. Frankly, marketing itself got so much more complicated. We need to bring in more specialized experts, which meant more stages, which meant a lot of different things. But there was something kind of magical to just having a couple of guys up there sharing exactly what was working for them. That's kind of what Get Scalable is now. Again, I don't want to compare it to TNC. They're two fundamentally different offerings, but that's how we treat it. So there's not a ton of really outside speakers. It's kind of us, sharing, my business partner, Roland Frazier, sharing like what's working across all our businesses to get them scaled. So I'm excited about it. It's the third year we've done it. It's sold out every year. And so it's, we keep it small. I think it's only like 500 or 600 people.
Yeah.
So we keep pretty small, keep pretty intimate.
Yeah, that's where you're not lost. Like it's big enough for where, there's people that can make an impact. You get the full spectrum, like a complete hierarchy, but you can still get involved wherever you want to get involved. That's awesome.
We're not trying to turn this into the place, like Traffic and Conversion Summit has kind of become like it became like the place for marketers. Like you just go there if you're a marketer, which I think is awesome in its own right. Like, and I can go to some sessions and learn some great stuff, but it's just about being in the place and around everybody and reconnecting with people. This is way more of you're going there to kind of be in the room and to learn stuff. And yeah, there's networking and things, but it's just, I think it's good to have both. I'm a teacher by nature, so I way more enjoy the workshop style, I can unpack this idea for an afternoon kind of thing. So, yeah, but I like all of them. I'd say if you're a marketer and you're trying to decide, I'd come to Traffic and Conversion Summit. Because also, you got Richard Branson there. And I can say that with all sincerity because if you buy a ticket to Traffic and Conversion Summit because we sold the event, I'll make nothing from that.
Look at that.
Absolutely nothing. But whereas if you come to Get Scalable Live, I'll make hundreds. So so there you
hundreds
go.
of dollars. That's fabulous.
Hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
So when I went a couple years ago, which was great, you invited me, and it was some entrepreneurs who were just starting out, some that had reached, I talked to a lot that had reached that point where they had built it to a level and then everything was breaking.
Yeah.
And it was the perfect conference for that. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say this is early stage, but I would say when stuff starts breaking, I think the structures and the formats and the frameworks that you guys teach, even the workshops, I still have some of the stuff from that workshop that I went back to my team. I guess we're not necessarily we're still a startup really, but I mean, not a small company by any stretch, but it was something for everybody. And I found like the networking was actually tremendous. I met a lot of really cool people. And it's a great event. So we'll obviously leave links in the show notes for that, but we highly recommend it here. Pretty much anything that you touch, Ryan. I know this isn't a suck-up show, but, we do pretty much like everything that you do. So, hey, we're biased here. Having said that, we are going to get into, after this quick commercial break, because I have to get paid. So, fill in the blank as to what I would be buying in a second or two, but make sure that you do go over to perpetualtraffic.com/YouTube. Watch this on YouTube. This is an actual podcast with Ryan Deiss. This isn't like a synthesia.io version of him. So head on over there.
Yeah. You're getting pretty bullish with your opinions there, Ralph. This could be AI Ryan.
This could be AI Ryan. No, actually, he's really here in the flesh. So we're going to get into the future of digital marketing and also the transition from digital marketer over to tier 11 right after this quick break. And what am I going to be buying with the advertising that we've sold on this?
Sensual cat massage. sensual cat massage, and I'll let you decide as the listener if it is a sensual massage for Ralph's cat or if it's a sensual massage for Ralph involving cats. Again, your imagination. See you on the other side.
So visit it at sensualcat.com.
Don't go to that. Tier 11 does not support sensual cat talk. We do not endorse nor condone whatever happens to those poor felines.
Thank God I can buy more of it. That's all I know. All right, we'll be back in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail, as Dad used to say. All right, so we're back with Ryan Deiss. Ryan Deiss, again, you heard of Ryan Deiss. Hopefully you have. If you've been listening to this show, like I said before, we mentioned Ryan at least a couple of times on every episode. I wouldn't say on every episode, but Ryan's obviously been a huge influence on me as well as on Kasim here. We'd like to think that we've got our digital marketing start from this guy. And the funny thing is, I'll tell this story. The Ryan's 43 split tests was the first internet marketing, digital marketing info product I ever bought. And I didn't buy anything between that. I think it was sold for $47 or $27.
I think it was $43 because it was
was it
$1
really?
for every split test. I think so, yeah.
It was an amazing value. And then I don't think I bought anything for 2 years until I bought War Room, which was $30,000. So I was the ultimate upsell. And I remember telling you this story. You're like, I wish I had more guys like you.
Yeah.
So
the best.
So you go from that to this. So anyway, so we ended up going from that small 43 split test is my entry level offer all the way to joining War Room. And this was back, 7+ years ago. And I remember I was I think Molly had invited me to, I forget which conference it was for Digital Marketer. But anyway, so the pitch at the end was for War Room. And I realized, okay, I had about $11,000 in my checking account at that point in time. And we did not have $1 million business, which was sort of an entry point. We were kind of close. We're getting there. Not quite there as of yet. And
$1 million in ad spend under management.
$1 million in ad spend under management. Yeah. That was probably more like it, not necessarily.
We would say
revenue.
$1 million momentum back in the day.
Right.
You're getting there.
Yeah, that's right. You're on your way. You're on your way. So it was the machine event. So I was like, this is great. You came on, you pitched it. I was like, you know what? I think I want to join this thing because first off, I knew the type of marketer that was in that room, the type of business that was in that room could really help the business. I knew that I would learn a whole lot. Obviously, I might have the chance of actually meeting and talking with you at some point, which I eventually did, and we became friends. And it was one of those events and one of those moments in my life where I was like, do you do it? Do you not do it? And it was the ballsiest move, I think, at that point in time. I wrote a check for 10 grand. I just happened to have it. And I knew the check would clear with 1,000 to spare. And that was it. And from that point on, really my business from not only your advice and all the things that we were able to do inside War Room, we met a lot of folks. This is when Facebook ads was really sort of first taking off. We called ourselves sort of the agency at that point. We didn't really even have Tier 11 as a brand name. And everything just sort of went from there. We got a lot of customers from there and a lot of great advice. And then I think it was maybe the third or fourth event where you got up on stage and you said, hey, who here, raise your hand, has a podcast? And I remember there was one guy at that point. I don't know, he had really long hair, not like Kasim, but kind of scraggly and he obviously knew what he was doing, but he was the only guy who raised his hand. I was like, wow, Brian wants to start a podcast. And then the next one, I remember we were at, the Beverly Hills Hotel that we always went to, the Meritage.
Yeah, the Montage Beverly Hills.
Montage Beverly Hills. You did it again. You're saying, all right, who here has a podcast? And 2 people raised their hands. I'd really like to start a podcast someday. So I remember I texted my then partner, Keith, And I had already known Molly now for maybe 6 months or so from that event. I said, hey, you want to start a podcast? And all three of us on this group text were like, yeah, that's great. I said, well, Ryan just said he wanted to start a podcast. Maybe we could start a podcast with you guys and have it under the Digital Marketer umbrella. And they're like, go for it. I'm like, all right, I've never talked to Ryan before. So at the break, I remember you were like grabbing coffee at one of those big silver coffee things, like everything is silver and shiny, at this hotel that I was clearly in over my head, a room that I couldn't afford. And so I went up to you, I asked you, I said, hey, would you like to start a podcast? And your answer was yes. And I was like, great. He's like, and then you said, I don't actually want to be on the show though, but I've got just the person that might want to be your co-host. And I said, is it Molly Pittman? And you're like, yeah. I was like, I already asked her and she's in. And you're like, Jesus, I have no authority in this company. People are doing stuff behind my back all the time. I don't even know about. And that's how it all started. And so that was 8 years ago. And we obviously worked together. We launched it. We did like 5 shows, launched it together, figured out the name Perpetual Traffic, and then started it from there and had a great run. And obviously a couple of co-hosts later, Kasim sort of came on the scene. And then about late last year,
nice of you to crowbar me into that story, Ralph. I'm not relevant at all, really.
And it was like just another hired guy.
Here I am, like awkward, doughy-eyed, just like looking at you, like
finally
get a haircut, get a real job, buddy.
We needed a guy with long hair, and so he fit the bill, fit the suit, so to speak. So we had this. What I felt was a very successful period of time, and it just didn't really fit into your guys' business model. So maybe we can take it from there, sort of how this whole thing transpired, because obviously here we are still talking with each other. It all worked out for everyone in the end. But maybe tell us about what was it in your business that had changed? Why did Perpetual Traffic no longer fit in with what you guys were doing with Scalable and with Digital Marketer? And then sort of we can take it from that point.
Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit backstory maybe you're not even aware of. So I was toying with the idea of having a podcast. And you're right, I didn't want to do a podcast. I wanted to have a podcast, which to me is a different animal. I've always more identified as a publisher than a creator or an influencer or anything like that. I never really wanted to be in the limelight as much. I'm in it plenty, but it's not really necessarily a role that I ever embraced. And so, but I felt like as a business, it's something that we should have at Digital Marketer. I was kind of toying with the idea. I'm prone to thinking out loud. And I was thinking out loud one day in front of the team. And yeah, Molly Pittman, who was our head of marketing at the time, was like, yeah, I want to do that. Let's do it. And I was like, absolutely. I love the idea of you doing it. She's like, great, I'm going to do it. I was like, no, don't do it yet. Because we're pretty thorough in terms of how we do our strategic planning. Right? We make sure we've got certain key initiatives and there's certain things that we will greenlight in a quarter. I was like, don't do it now. Let's gather some research. We got enough stuff to say grace over here. Let's maybe pick it up next quarter if things are going well. And she's like, but I don't want to wait that long. And I was like, okay, I'll tell you what. If we can get all this stuff done before the end of the quarter, then fine, we can go nuts. And so when I was going out to War Room and saying like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, that was me gathering information for something that's going to happen way in the future. Well, around that same time, sure enough, we'd hit all our goals and we got all our stuff accomplished before. And so I'm always like, I'm in, like, I want to do it. And that was around the same time when you had reached out to her. That's why she pounced. But the truth is, we never really went into this strategically. It was always something that, having a podcast was always something that I knew we needed, but it wasn't clear to me how it was going to fit back in. And because we didn't necessarily approach it strategically, it never really had a home inside of Digital Marketer. It was this separate brand. It was run by, other people. Eventually, Molly left the company and started her own thing. And now she's, with Ezra, you and, nobody was in Digital Marketer. Right. And so it wasn't really like Digital Marketer's podcast, which I don't care about that. I don't have any pride of ownership, but it's like, if we're kind of funding this thing, if we are, if we're going to give it some energy, it needs to flow back in. And this is a mistake that I think a lot of marketers make. A lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of business owners make. They're not clear on how they actually create value as a company, how they create and capture value. They haven't mapped it out. They haven't visualized it. They haven't said, this is how we actually turn strangers into leads, into customers, into raving fans. They haven't mapped that out. I've been talking about this forever, whether it was the $1 million napkin or the customer value journey, or growth engines, something we've been talking about and something I'm very adamant. Anything that we're going to do needs to funnel back into an existing proven growth engine. And the podcast, it could do it sort of through ads, it could do it sort of through host reads, but it didn't have a clear through line. And because of that, it just never got the resources that I felt like it deserved. And but I always loved the show, and I always loved the brand and the following and what it produced. And it came to a point where it's like, we are not the best people to own this, because we are not just honoring this asset. We're not a good steward of this asset. Not because the asset isn't worth it. It's because it is worth it that it should be under another steward. At the time, like, we had different leadership at Digital Marketer who felt that there needed to be a Digital Marketer branded podcast. And so Digital Marketer now had launched its own podcast. So I'm like, well, how many podcasts are we going to have for this one freaking brand? Like, this doesn't make any sense at all. So that was why, ultimately it was like, hey, maybe we should figure this out. And honestly, dude, I don't remember if you reached out to me or if I reached out to you. I don't remember the triggering event, but I think, sometimes just multiple people come to the same conclusions at the same time, because everybody's feeling the same thing. Everybody has good intentions. But yeah, that was where kind of, when we were reevaluating at the end of last year, what are the assets that we have that are currently underutilized? Do we want to double down on them, or do we want to exit them?
Right.
And we had to be honest and look at, we had to be really honest and look at perpetual traffic and say, this just isn't an asset that we are going to be a good steward of. Let's look at exiting it. And so that's ultimately the backstory and where it ended up. And I'm really happy with, that it found an amazing home with you guys, and that it's still rocking and rolling, and that you still let me on from time to time.
Well, even more so now. The funny thing is that before, I think it was an email that Richard had sent me. It was crazy, because we had just come out of our quarterly meeting, and we said, is there an opportunity to potentially purchase the show?
Yeah.
And I was like, how do I approach this? I'm like, all right, well, I'll probably maybe email Ryan or text him maybe after the first of the year. And then it was right around, I think, Thanksgiving, like before Thanksgiving, and it all sort of happened really quickly. The funny thing was it was already on our radar as something that we wanted to potentially double down on, because I think it was always doing well, but it's like, what if we really put a lot of assets behind, a lot of power behind it, not necessarily from tier 11, but for perpetual traffic, its own brand that then would potentially feed other projects. And obviously tier 11 being one of those things as an agency, and it just made sense. And obviously it was helpful for us from a credibility standpoint, from an authority standpoint. And also, we do get leads from it, which is obviously helpful as well. But the point is like, we were thinking along those same lines. And when the email happened, I was like, oh, well, this is just a great opportunity. But I could also understand, once we sort of understood like where it fit into your portfolio, I'm like, all right, now this makes sense, But for me, it was an opportunity for us to sort of exit that partnership. And I always sort of felt like you guys weren't getting enough out of it. So it was like, what can I do to help Digital Marketer and you all specifically get more out of the show? And even with that, we couldn't really make it work for you. And so it was a logical step for us to potentially do this kind of arrangement, which ended out, working really, really well. And it was probably one of the easier things, I think. We've done a number of transactions. We're in the middle of a couple right now, and it was an easy thing. We just had to figure out like what the price was. And in podcasting, it's really hard to tag a value on price. And I think we've talked about this. Greg Smith was on the show talking about like how to exit your business. There's really no model for pricing a podcast, because it's hard. It's like, without the hosts, maybe it's less value, without, digital marketers, list and promotion behind it, it's less valuable. So how do you actually value it? And I think we had differing views of what that is. But at the end of the day, it's all about like, what's the value to you and what you feel that is fair. Fair is always like, air quotes, like who the hell knows what fair is. But I think, if you're selling a business like in the agency model, like we know what agencies sell for. There's multiples that they sell for. In the software business, there's multiples that they sell for. Bricks and mortar, the same sort of thing. But with a podcast, it was a little bit harder to figure that out. And I think that was one of the more challenging things to do. But I think we were both of the same mindset, like, let's try and do the right thing, because we, first off, both respected each other, but also wanted to respect the brand and put it in the best home possible.
Yeah, and nobody went about it with well, we've got to decide by this date or we're just going to blow the whole thing up. And I think that helped. I think that's when negotiations like these can go bad, is when there's essentially a kill switch involved. And sometimes, look, you have no choice but to introduce that and have a forcing function. But we didn't start there. So we had both agreed that, like, look, we're going to continue to fund this show, like, basically into perpetuity. Like, we're going to figure this out. Just our desire is to exit it, and we won't be able to fund it forever. So we want to be able to say, like, let's figure this out, because we're not going to kill it next month or the month after that. But if we can't get it going, if we don't have a plan by the end of the year or going into the, January of next year, then we probably are going to make a plan to sunset it. Like, we're just going to have to do that. And so that's kind of the reality of it. And it is hard. It's hard to establish a valuation on things that don't have a clear market rate. And, I know the perspective that we took is, at what point does it make sense for us to give up the possible future opportunity? Right. Valuing it based on what it was generating today for us wasn't really helpful, because it wasn't much, which is why we wanted to sell. So we had to be honest about that. We didn't have all the insights on what it was worth to you. So, trying to make assumptions there, it's okay, but, like, you would bring that. So from our perspective, it was basically, well, anything really below this amount, we'd rather just keep it. Keep the brand, even if we got to sunset the thing. It's always hard to revive things once they've gone, but, like, anything below this, we'll take our chances. It's not worth selling, right? Anything over that, and, it's worth doing, because we had a specific use of funds in mind. We can take this revenue that's coming from, we can deploy it into this particular area where we know we'll get a greater return than what this thing is. And so at some point, it comes down to capital allocation. And I do believe that marketers at scale really are capital allocators. Entrepreneurs at scale are capital allocators. Whether that capital is human capital, whether it's revenue, at scale, we are all capital allocators, and you got to make the best decision based on the capital that's there. And so I don't remember where you came in, but we had essentially established what we believe to be a range of reasonableness. Mm-hmm. So not even fair, because fair is it's kind of a loaded term, but from our perspective, on the low end, this is the minimum, and anything that we would even think we could get on the high end is here. And I think you proposed a number, and our deal is always, if somebody proposes a number within the range of reasonableness, we take it. We don't try to negotiate back and forth unless something else came in. I think you proposed a number, and we negotiated on terms a bit. But in general, when you fell within the range of reasonableness, I knew we would probably have a deal. Yeah. So that's kind of the process. And, I think there's lessons there for entrepreneurs in terms of acquisition. I think there's a bigger meta lesson there, though, that's important. Many of the people listening to this right now, if you're listening to this right now, there's a good chance that there's a conversation you need to have with someone.
Right.
With someone. And you're putting it off because you say you're still thinking it through, but the reality is you kind of know what needs to be done. You just haven't pulled the trigger because it's going to be a hard conversation. I would just encourage you, in my experience in life, anytime I'm sitting on one of those hard conversations, the person I want to have that conversation with, or rather I need to have that conversation with, they know it needs to happen too. And they're thinking along the same lines as well. And if you approach it with some kind of graciousness and humility and just say, hey, we need to have a conversation about this, oftentimes you're going to see this sense of relief happen. It doesn't mean that it's always easy and that the outcome is always perfect. Our conversation have to be easy. And I think everybody still to this day is super thrilled with the outcome. That's not always how it goes down, but it's almost certainly not going to be as bad as you think it's going to be. They're thinking it too. So just have that conversation.
If you guys don't mind, I just want to pause for a moment. And first, a compliment to you, Ryan, that will preface what it is that I want to say. I think you're the best I've ever seen at frameworks. And I don't know if you come up with these, if you collect them, if you amalgamate them, but like as I've learned from you, and it's been almost a decade that I've been learning from you, I've seen you come up, and I actually have a notepad here that I'm looking at. You had the growth triad framework. You had the 90-day game plan, the growth scorecard, the growth lever canvas, the customer value journey. Even the machine was a framework. And again, I don't know if this was off the top of your head or if this is something that you were pulling from, legacy data that lives in whatever repository you're pulling your brilliance. But you just gave us a really phenomenal framework for valuing anything, but especially a company, when there's no rules engine. And I'm going to do my best to try to repeat that framework, and then maybe you can help kind of buttress what I heard you say was. And I picture, a graph in my mind's eye, and you kind of have that standard line of demarcation where if you take the cost that it would take to sustain this entity, and then that stands as the variable. And then you find the number where anything beneath this threshold, it's actually worth me continuing to either outlay this cost or put it on ice. And anything above this threshold now becomes, and I love your range of reasonableness. And in worlds where there aren't frameworks for business valuation, and I think there's a lot of those. There's a lot of little things where it's like, I don't know what my list is worth. I don't know what this profile is worth. I don't know what this media property is worth. Like, how could that not?
I don't know what I should pay this person, by the way.
Dude, what a great point. I don't know what this role is worth.
Yeah, I don't know what this role is worth. I mean, oftentimes it exists. Go to salary.com, double check. Because I think also we create roles that don't exist and shouldn't exist. But very often.
I've done that quite often.
Yeah, very often.
Guilty as charged.
Very often it is something that's kind of unique. And so, it's all those things. I got to give credit where credit's due, by the way. The range of reasonableness I learned from my business partner, Roland Frazier. And Roland, who is a recovering attorney, who, he and I own a business together called Epic Network, where it's all about buying and selling businesses. Roland has this perception and this brand about him as being like this, tough negotiator. Like, you don't want to be on the other side of the negotiating table from Roland Frazier. And what I know, because I've both been on the other side of the table from him a couple of times when we've been negotiating business partnerships and things like that, but I've been on the same side of the table with him, dozens and dozens of times. That's how Roland does it. He's like, what is the range of reasonableness, right? What's the low end? What's the high end? And if somebody comes in in the range, he's like, we're not gonna argue. If somebody comes in on the outer end of the range, we're actually going to talk them down into, even if we're negotiating against our own position, we're going to try to talk them down into the range, or we're going to try to learn why they're willing to pay so much more that we don't know. We're going to ask questions, because if it's outside of our range, eventually somebody's going to wind up being unhappy. And if it's below, we're going to politely say, unfortunately, we just can't go that low, or if we're on the buy side, we can't go that high. So I think going into it, doing your research and understanding what is your particular range of reasonableness. And the way that you assess the high and the lows is, Kasim, exactly what you said. I mean, it's going to be things like, what's the opportunity cost if we keep it? What's the opportunity cost if we give it away? I think the most important question to ask is, what else are we going to do with this money, right? If we're selling it, what are we going to do with the proceeds? And if we're buying, is there anything else that we could buy that would generate a higher return than this? And I think when you think about it like a capital allocator, it removes a lot of the emotions from it. Because it's hard. I hate selling assets. I do. I'm a hoarder. I'm a hoarder of companies and assets. It is so hard to get rid of them. But at the end of the day, we make money when we sell, not when we hold and not when we buy. Right. We make it when you sell. So you gotta freaking sell. So
this is gonna get real personal.
All right.
How many domain names do you own?
Dude, it's way down because I've gotten better.
Okay. It's still I figured you were like on a drip and you had to go like domain name anonymous and.
So not kidding. I don't even have a login to our domain, to our GoDaddy account anymore.
That's what it is. You've been put through an intervention.
Oh man, I know I got a problem. Yeah. I mean, at the time it was thousands at one point. God, Perry and I would sit up at the office. I'm not proud of this. We'd sit up at the office and like work and drink and just come up with stupid things and would always just buy the domain name. And there were some.
Thanks to you.
One time. We'd spell them wrong. We thought we just crushed it. And it's like, you look it up, it's like, you're an idiot. You just can't spell.
You wake up the next morning like, what did I buy last night?
Because it is
spelled
still
it with a Q. I didn't realize.
Yeah, it's still in the hundreds. I'd say it's over 200, but I'd give the over 200, under 500. But there was a time when it was easily in the thousands. Like we had our own rep at GoDaddy. You don't really want your own rep at GoDaddy. Right. It's like you don't want a disease named after you. Like there's certain things you don't want. So, and it's not like I was a
dealer.
domainer. I was just an idiot. So, yeah.
Yeah, as you were talking, it just, when you're saying I'm a business hoarder, I thought to myself, I was like, this is a man with his own CAN Spam Act compliant
I got better.
registrar. Yeah.
I've gotten better.
I think an interesting takeaway of this before we head into commercial break and we figure out what else I'm going to be buying with that advertising dollar is that as soon as I started to realize like what the actual value was, instead of just like I had my CFO like running numbers and just figuring out, okay, what's the actual value, but not it wasn't the intrinsic value. What could the value be to you guys? All of a sudden it changed my frame. And I think this could be looked at two ways. And I said, first off, I trust these guys. Like I've been working with them for a long period of time. So that establishes a lot. And I think this is hard to do in a business negotiation where you look at their viewpoint as a negotiating tactic to try and get your price up, as opposed to really trying to understand and thinking this through. Because it didn't take long. It was like less than 2 weeks, as I recall. Like we figured out like the price, and then we kind of got together and figured out, all right, what are the details of it? But it wasn't until I really realized, all right, this is more valuable to them than maybe we're pricing it. And then talking to my CFO, who's done a fair amount of M&A work for KPMG, he's got a really solid background here. It's not just a logical thing. You got to figure out. And then on the other side, it's like, what's the potential value for me? And if those numbers somewhat match, like then you end up having a deal. And I think that's where my business mind changed as a result of that negotiation, because we talked to private equity groups and Kasim was already sold his business. Like it's pretty hard and fast, like what the multiples are going to be based upon a couple of different factors. But with this, there was so much more to it. And I think as a business person, you do have to really look at the other person's side, not as just a negotiating tactic, but really what is the value to them. And I think that's what makes a good business deal. And it worked out well for everyone in the end.
You got to seek to understand for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, so should we talk about why we need to take a commercial break? What you specifically, Ralph, need to pay for?
What am I buying next?
Face toupees, ladies and gentlemen, face toupees. If you've seen Ralph in person, you should know the beard is not real. It is a face toupee. This one, I'll be honest, is going a little gray, as face toupees are oft to do. Some more face toupees for Ralph Burns. Check out our sponsors. Get Ralph some more face toupees. We'll see you on the other side.
Make sure that you do go over to perpetualtraffic.com and look up all the links that we left in the show notes. We'll leave links, obviously, to Traffic and Conversion Summit, as well as Get Scalable Live. That's October 2nd and 4th. Guys, I can't tell you, like, it's coming up fast. So grab your ticket to that. It's totally worth it. I went a couple years ago, like I said before. It was absolutely amazing. And obviously Traffic and Conversion Summit in Vegas. You guys are so big, you got to go to Vegas. So perfect time of the year for that. So much going on here. Hopefully you found this week's episode useful. If so, make sure that you, first off, subscribe, leave a rating wherever you listen to podcasts. Tell us what we can do better as well in either that review or over at perpetualtraffic.com/better. We still look at that every single week. Make sure that you check out what we're doing on the socials for LinkedIn for me, and then Kasim all over his socials. And go back and listen to previous episodes, and we'll leave links in the show notes for that. And make sure you check out our YouTube channel. Got to plug the YouTube channel, perpetualtraffic.com/YouTube. And all resources and show notes at perpetualtraffic.com. So thank you so much, Ryan Deiss, for coming on here on today's show. On behalf of my awesome co-host, Kasim Aslam.
Peace.
Until next show, see ya.